Hi, I'm Paula Gloria, and this is my show, Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. Welcome. Today we have a very, very special show. My show started off with interviews from people who are now stars on the movie What the Bleep Do We Know? And this movie was about how we create our reality, how consciousness creates our reality. And as the show progressed, I became more and more interested in the reality around me, and that led me to contemplate the whole field of politics. And so the show became one that involves both spirituality and politics. And the study of politics is often considered the study of power. In India, power is associated with the divine feminine, or Shakti. And today I have represented on this set, in myself and my two guests, all traditions of the religions that involve people of the book. I'm Christian. My friend Atiya Khan is Muslim. My good friend Rabbi Bobroff, of course, is Jewish. And all of these traditions hearken back to an original sacrifice, the sacrifice of Abraham. And this is a vast topic, and a topic that I'm going to be unfolding on my own show, and a topic that I'm encouraging other producers to unfold, because it explains the difference and the similarity between both these endeavors, to take our wisdom and share it, that we can develop ourselves, and once we've developed ourselves, we can bring this development into society. And that today, instead of religions being in competition, we can work together to unfold our highest new realities. So welcome so much to Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. Atiyah, can you first explain a little bit about your background, how you got interested in these topics of spirituality?
Well, Paula, I'd always sort of, I'd lived abroad when I was young, and I was constantly questioned.
Excuse me, you were born in Pakistan?
No, I was born in Hong Kong.
Oh, you're born in Hong Kong, but you're Pakistani.
But I'm Pakistani. And I needed to better inform myself about my own religion, about my own roots, and that's really how I started sort of studying the Quran and the Hadith and then the Masters. But it was shortly before 9/11 that I met a very special person who later on I took as my teacher. His name is Sheikh Nazim al-Haqqani, and he's the head of the Naqshbandi Sufi Silsila. And since then I've been studying with him, and have opened to this, what we believe is the true enlightened message of Islam.
Wonderful. And Rabbi Bobroff, can you explain a little of your background?
Well, I've been thinking about seeing a theme, and I'm writing what I call the unauthorized autobiography called The Confessions of a Rabbinical Heretic. Mm-hmm. And that word heretic in some way seems to be the most...
It means a partial teaching, heresy.
No,
right?
Well, heresy actually, a heretic is someone who believes in the tradition, but says that unfortunately everybody else until now has missed the point, the original point. You see, it's not a rejection of a tradition. It's saying they made a mistake as to what the tradition is about. Now, I've been approached to submit an article to an anthology, which I am calling How and Why God Intentionally, or How and Why the Scriptures Intentionally Misled Us.
Right. How the Scriptures intentionally misled us. That sounds like an enormous conspiracy, doesn't it?
Well, I believe that the Bible contradicts itself in many ways. You have a more fundamental militaristic
interpretation.
Parts, literal
Interpretation.
parts,
Literal
you see.
parts, I got
And
it.
then you have other things which are much different, but they're not as explicit. They're hinted at, you see. And what I've been doing is going back. You see, my background is very interesting. I came from almost non-religious background. My parents knew nothing, did nothing. And it was only after I was about 8, 9 years old they sent me to Hebrew school, and I ended up being an Orthodox rabbi.
Yeah, you exerted yourself to become an Orthodox rabbi.
Right. And then I felt that science and religion was in conflict, so I studied everything in science and everything in religion that I could possibly find to make some kind of a reconciliation. And my work now, for over 40 years, has been to go back to the texts, you see, both Jewish and otherwise, but particularly the Jewish, and find out what did it really say.
Yes. Now, what I'm interested in, if there's wisdom that can help us live more harmoniously in the world. Do we have Webster on the line with us? Webster's been a constant focus of mine on these shows because he talks about 9/11 as a myth, as something that we need to understand better, because this myth and this misunderstanding that we have has given rise to huge strife and bloodshed and warfare in the world. And you're talking about the Bible having parts that we can look at carefully.
I'd like to make one point.
Yes.
Which I think is most relevant to all other issues. And this is very startling. If you look at the Bible, particularly the book of Jeremiah, which I think gives the key as to how the change will take place. The Bible is dedicated to the idea that there will be a total transformation of human nature. The question is, how will it happen? The impression you get from Jeremiah, very clear, is that God is going to come and zap humanity. It has nothing to do with what people are going to do.
Now, how does that jive with your experience with an enlightened master in India after you were a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi? Did God come down and zap this man?
That's what he says. He said
Okay.
he died. He turned into a robot.
Right.
See. He says it's acausal.
It's acausal.
Acausal. See, he
Right.
talks this nonsensical language. He says it's acausal. He says it's in spite of everything I did. Not even though he was considered one of the great masters on the planet.
Right.
He says it's in spite of what I did. It just happened to me. It retransformed me.
Could he be a model for all of us?
He thinks
Not all of us individually, but that
The
if
potential.
you were to look at the collective behavior of the United Nations or whatever international behavior that we have with each other, particularly how we make war on each other in the name of our different traditions, in the name of our different countries, our nationalities. Some people say, get rid of nationality, get rid of religion, and then we can just live more humanely. That religions and rituals make us less humane.
Well,
so
I've put this into.
we have Webster on the line.
I put this into.
Webster, are you on the line? Have you been following this discussion?
As best I can, Paula. The line was not working well.
It wasn't working well. Well, basically, I'm trying to set the stage, Webster, to bring out something very practical that you bring to the table, and that is that we desperately need to come to the peace table in the Middle East. So maybe you can outline how you see it, and then we'll make our comments about how we should pressure our Jewish, Muslim, Christian community, religious leaders to make this happen.
Yes, if I may, I would like to address the issue that seems to cast a terrible shadow over everything, which is that according to, I think, just about any intelligence picture that one could make right now, the world is on the brink of a colossal catastrophe. We are on the edge of the abyss in terms of something that could only be called World War III or perhaps a new 30 years war. And this is something that you can see empirically. You can see the conflagration that's now going on in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Lebanon, and in many, many other parts of the world where constant warfare has become endemic. And it seems to me that we have got to have persons of goodwill at this point address the question of whether we're going to lose a great deal of what has been attained in the area of civilization so far on the altar of Mars, the god of war, because there are very active and very vocal political forces that are coming to the fore now, and they're talking about the futility of all negotiation, that peace cannot be attained. They are demonizing the other side and essentially recommending war as the universal panacea for every problem that we can see in the world. And I think it's a tragic situation. It has already been compared to July or August of 1914 or to August of 1939, we are looking at a planetary scale conflagration. And it seems to me that we have got to have persons of goodwill return to the primacy of negotiated solutions and the peace table. In other words, what we obviously need in the Middle East is a general peace conference for the Middle East that would address everything from the Palestinian state to the security of Israel, the territorial integrity of Lebanon, the end of the occupation in Iraq, the problems regarding Iran and Syria, the reconstruction of many of these areas that have been destroyed, and if you want to extend it further, indeed the peaceful solution for Afghanistan. I would just stress one last point, which is that none of these negotiations can really hope to be successful unless we address also the underlying question of poverty, misery, underdevelopment, ignorance, and the fact that the personal standards of living in most of these countries have been collapsing catastrophically over the past 20 or 30 years under the guise of globalization. In other words, what we need is new Marshall plans, new regional development schemes that will be based on real high technology, industrial, scientific development, not on things like tourism or gambling or things of this sort.
Now, Webster, I'm going to ask people to put up a graphic of your book and that it's your voice, because I've been running a PSA almost every day on my show where you explain how 9/11 and deconstructing what really happened is essential to peace in the Middle East. Can you outline that in context of what we're talking about, that peace is a more reasonable solution, and even if some think tanks in Beaver Creek, Colorado are saying war is the solution, that we also have great exalted beings from all the religious traditions that say differently?
Well, certainly. The book that I've written is called 9/11 Synthetic Terror,
Can
Made
we have
in
that
USA.
graphic up? I want to make sure. Okay, great. Keep going, Webster.
My book is called 9/11 Synthetic Terror, Made in USA, and it is a study of the terrorist events of September 11, 2001, almost 5 years ago. And the conclusion that I come to is that the version of this that is advanced by the United States government is a fraud and a falsification, and that the Kane-Hamilton-Zelikow Commission in particular amounts to a tissue of lies, that the attacks did not come from the Arab or Islamic worlds in any sense, but rather were a deliberate, cynical war provocation from the bowels of the U.S. military security bureaucracy, from the CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, the Pentagon, the National Security Council, reaching into the Treasury and other branches of the U.S. government, and that the protagonist of these attacks was something we'd have to call the rogue network, the secret government, the parallel government that people became familiar with perhaps during the Iran-Contra drug running and gun running, but we can also identify it with the force behind the Bay of Pigs, the Kennedy assassination, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the Vietnam War, the bombing of Serbia in 1999, and so on down the line.
Now Webster, let me slow you down, because some people are going to be hearing this for the first time. You are saying, really, that terror is terrorism that's ascribed to a different flag, a different country, maybe originating from the country that's being victimized itself. Is that correct?
Exactly. If we take the USS Maine being blown up in Havana Harbor to start the Spanish-American War and found the American Empire in the Philippines and other places, it's clear in retrospect through the analysis of Admiral Hyman Rickover that the explosion that sank the Maine came from inside the battleship, and this was therefore an inside job that had to be carried out with the collusion of people in the United States Navy, and that the Spanish would never have blown up this battleship.
Absolutely.
It would have been suicidal for them to do it.
Now, Webster, you can't see right now, but Atiya came rather alive on this, so I would like her to make a comment on what you just said.
Of course.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, when you know, if this was coming from a Muslim, it would sound, you know, sort of tainted.
Did you catch that, Webster? She said if this was coming from a Muslim, it would not be as well received.
So, but I think that a lot of the American people are more and more realizing that reality is being constructed for them. Media is controlled. The message that is going out there is the message that the vested interests want going out there. But I think we are all really, really aware of that now, you know. But I think we need to go back to what Webster was talking about, demonization of the so-called enemy. And I think that's very important because in my understanding, every religion has two aspects to it. There is the authoritarian, clerical, vested interest, almost fundamentalist, militant side to every religion.
Well, fundamentalist, Webster says, is what can be used to be manipulated.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and it has, you know, because there's power involved, there's influence over people involved, there's money involved, you know, so it has obviously that aspect to it where it can be manipulated and the people can be manipulated in the name of religion. But every religion has a mystical, spiritual side of it that a majority of people are practicing and believe in.
We can call on that side to insist on the peace table. Do you think, Rabbi Bobroff, that spirituality, a deep study, can give us the power that we need to make these things happen, that it doesn't happen just because we should be moral and be good and do good, but it comes from a divine connection?
Well, unfortunately, the connection is the most paradoxical of all things. The highest name of God in the Kabbalah, which we loosely translate as Jewish mysticism, is ayin. Ayin means nothingness.
Okay.
Absolute nothingness.
Now let's not lose Webster here because
and
Webster, Al Bobroff heard you on WBAI, so I'll turn you over to Al, okay?
All right.
Talk to Webster now.
The key here is nothingness, and the nothingness is not just theoretical. The nothingness is inside. This whole idea that I'm going to fix the world, or my religion is going to fix the world, or my beliefs, or my science. This is what creates the ego conflict.
Okay.
So what happens, what we need to do is surrender all this, and we turn ourselves into nothingness. Yuji, who I discovered in India, you see.
That's the enlightened master that Rabbi Bobroff had contact with Webster a few decades ago.
And you see, his attitude is, I don't have any answer for you, and there is no answer for you. His path is through the non-answer. What I'm saying is that each of us, each sect, each group, has to give up their effort to change the world. This is what I'm saying. The Bible says that human beings are not going to fix the world. God is going to have to come in and zap it. In fact, the rabbis say the Messiah will come either when everybody is perfect or everybody is terrible.
Right.
Kula chayim, kula zakai. Either everybody is good or everybody is bad.
Is that why we have Israel right now? Because everybody's good or bad?
Well, you see, we have to resolve this. There's an inner conflict.
Right.
When the conflict stops, then the Messiah is here. But what I'm saying very practically, and it's the most paradoxical of all concepts, the most paradoxical is to give up the belief that I can change things, that my ideas can change things. And my whole work has been there is a company called Disinformation, and their whole point is everything you know is wrong.
Yeah.
And George Bernard Shaw said this. The problem is not that we don't know enough, but we know too much that is not so.
Right.
And we have to get rid of these false concepts.
Right, but now my spirituality comes alive when I read Webster's information. Webster, do you have a comment on that?
Well, I would just have to say, I come out this naturally, not primarily from a religious point of view and not from a mystical one, but I try to represent sort of the reality-based community, and what I do is basically an empirical study of the world. I would look at it from the point of view of Plato and Leibniz, who are the main guides that I have, and in particular Leibniz's doctrine of continuous creation. In other words, God created the world, but the world is not a finished product, and it therefore has ample room for a continuous creation in which human beings play a positive, indeed an indispensable role. So what I would recommend is we have to accept the world more or less as it is. We have to be great realists. We cannot be motivated by some wild utopian plan of reforming reality or banishing corruption or anything of this sort. I think this is the main problem with the neocons. That to the extent that they're thinkers at all, they seem to have a wild, radical idea of a utopian world that dances before their eyes. And rather, we've got to accept the groups that exist in the world and try to find a modus vivendi, a peaceful solution that allows humanity to get along. And since we're all creatures of needs, we have to have economic development. We have to have science, technology, rising standards of living. We've got to do something for the labor movement, for the status of women, for the condition of children who need to be educated. And therefore, it seems to me that a peaceful solution is what we need. The great lesson of the 20th century is that war is futile at best, and it's generally suicidal. And we still have people who haven't learned that, and unfortunately, they're in powerful positions. The last thing I would just add is the 9/11 myth is a recipe for war. It practically concocts war on its own because it is really a blood libel against the Arab and Islamic world in particular, singling them out and blaming them for something that they didn't do, which was to organize these attacks on September 11th. And that's why my book has the subtitle Made in USA, because this was entirely homegrown, entirely organized by U.S.-based factions. There are some Arabs who come into it, but they're largely patsies. They're people who, for various reasons, hardly know what they're doing and are simply the scapegoats in the way that Lee Harvey Oswald was a scapegoat for the Kennedy assassination.
But Webster, in your book, you explain how they're actually selected exactly for that purpose.
Yes, and I'm afraid we're soon going to see another example of this. We've just had this ludicrous stunt announced by the British, this alleged plot to blow up airplanes over the North Atlantic. What we're going to see very soon is a parade of 20 to 25 young Muslim men, in this case of Pakistani origins. These are going to be people of limited mental ability quite often, people that we could describe as mentally deficient or mentally retarded. And you're going to find that there are agents of MI5 and MI6 in that group, leading the group with large amounts of money, giving these people money and jobs and promising them things, so that in effect the double agents in the group will turn out to be the enablers, the facilitators, the entrappers, and the origins of these ideas. It's quite likely that we'll find that no explosives had ever been obtained by the group, and that the entire thing was just manufactured out of thin air in order to create hysteria and to renew the reign of terror around the world that the U.S. and the British have tried to impose on the mind of humanity.
Webster, I'm going to let Atiya comment on that, because you said that some of these patsies may be Pakistani. They'll claim that. How does that make you feel, Atiya? I mean, knowing that your culture is so cultured. It's so refined in it.
Well, I mean, again, Webster is absolutely correct. I mean, for Muslims, it's common knowledge who created the Taliban, who funded them, who financed them, who trained them. Right. It was the CIA, it was the U.S. It's no secret.
I know. And Webster, this is a really refined lady. This is not.
Who created Saddam Hussein? I mean, yes. For us, it's it's common knowledge. CIA. He was a CIA person. Yes. Now, for this kind of information to be coming out to the American public, for them to become aware of these.
Well, because we have this precious public access.
Yes, it's very important. But I think, for me, again, I think there's a struggle going on within each tradition, within each religion. And again, this is a mistake to label people, to say, oh, he's Jewish, or oh, she's Muslim, or oh, she's, because there are many strands within each religion, and we have to come to an understanding now that there are good and bad, peaceful, peace-loving people and hate-mongering people in each tradition, in each religion, in each country. You cannot label people anymore.
Even academia goes in different disciplines.
I'd love to connect to this. I think the missing link here is what is known in the mystical world as non-active, non-doing, not doing, which connects to non-being. Now, how can something be and not be at the same time? How can you do and not do at the same time? And there's an excellent book called Effortless Living, which explains this more psychologically. You see.
But I think
And,
that that's very.
and
We
we
only
have
have
we
1
have to
minute.
work
Yeah.
we have to work toward a solution, but not through struggle and strife, because then it turns into conflict.
Well, sure, that's a personal aspect of, your personal spiritual growth, which is like the Sufis say, to get rid of your ego and, let the ego die. And that's beautiful for a spiritual self thing. But I think on a wider perspective of informing the public, it's very important to start perceiving Islam in a more, the more enlightened aspect of Islam, which is...
So deconstructing 9/11, Webster, could help do what Atiya says we need to do.
And,
Is that right, Webster?
Let me just try to respond to what's been said.
Let's
In
go out. Webster,
Christianity-
you take it out, okay? Because we have 1 minute left.
In Christianity, we have the notion of charity. In Islam, there's the notion of social solidarity. In Confucianism, there's the notion of benevolence. And I think in the other great religions, you have similar concepts, and that there is an ample platform of cooperation for humanity in solving the overall problem that we have, is that 3 billion people in the world get along on less than $1 a day. And that's the number one problem that we have, and that's what we have to solve.
Okay. We actually still have 1 minute left. What do you think, Atiya?
I think, yes, economics and politics are very important, but I think I would agree with the rabbi also. There's an inner change that needs to happen for individuals to open up and realize that, we are being hoodwinked, we are being conditioned to hate and fall into these traps. And, for me, Islam is about a continuity from Adam to Muhammad. It's a chain, and we believe in all the prophets, and we believe that we believe in Jesus coming back and heralding the kingdom of heaven with our Messiah, which is Imam Mahdi, and which we think is similar to the Jewish Messiah. And so there's so much more that we have in common, and to focus on that, on the common.
Well, Webster, I want to thank you for joining us and having this excursion farther down the rabbit hole, where we're bringing politics and spirituality together, so that we can really make this peace table happen, Webster.
I hope so. I think that's obviously what we need, is that all of these problems are susceptible to peaceful, negotiated solutions, and that's what we need, because the Third World War does not serve anybody's interest. It's a catastrophe beyond current imagination.
So if the neocons believe in war, we can just as equally believe in a spiritual science, a science to bring out our full potential.
War is futile or suicidal, and the content of peace is economic development, as Pope Paul VI pointed out in the famous encyclical Populorum Progressio back in 1967.
Except that economics is being used to manipulate people, right now. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Webster, so much for being with us. And
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me farther down the rabbit hole. I'm Paula Gloria. I think we did good.
You think so?